Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the Stranger from Montenegro. It was 12 minutes past midnight, which in Wolfe's Brownstone meant one of two things. Either my milk had gone tepid, or trouble had decided to dress up and call on us uninvited. I had just tipped the glass for a last swallow when the telephone shrilled loud enough to shake the plaster lions off the banister. Phones after midnight don't bring social niceties. They bring corpses, crooks, or Inspector Kramer, roaring like a tugboat with a bad boiler. I put the glass down, wiped my hand on a handkerchief, and lifted the receiver. North 35th Street, Archie Goodwin presiding. The voice on the other end was sharp, foreign-edged, and carrying a tremor like a wire about to snap. Mr. Wolfe, I must immediately. Tonight. They will kill me before dawn. I leaned back in the chair and gave it a grin he couldn't see. You sound like you've had a rough evening. Mr. Wolfe is asleep, and believe me, he values that higher than the U.S. Treasury. You'll have to wait until morning. No, listen. The words came clipped, the accent Balkan with a rasp. The ledger of Montenegro is not safe. You must ask the orchid man. The click came sharp as a gunshot. Deadline. I jiggled the cradle, got nothing but humming silence. If it was a gag, it was well timed. If it wasn't, I had just heard a man's last words. From upstairs came the unmistakable thunder of Wolfe's voice wrapped in irritation and bedclothes. Archie, confound it, who? I called up the stairwell. A gentleman from Montenegro, boss. Says he's going to be murdered before dawn. Also, he recommends you consult your orchids. Silence, then a growl that could have fertilized a field of cabbages. Pfui! Inform him that Mr. Wolfe receives no clients at such hours. He hung up before I could put that in writing. The sound of slippered feet on carpet moved toward the railing above. Wolfe appeared in his yellow silk robe, eyes heavy-lidded, face scowling like a Roman senator interrupted mid-oratory. He gripped the banister as though the wood had personally offended him. An uninvited caller, foreign, incoherent, and presumptuous. He pulled the robe tighter. Archie, what precisely did he say? I repeated it, every word. Wolfe listened, chin dipping, expression darkening. At Orchid Man his eyebrows twitched, which for him was the equivalent of a Broadway chorus line fainting. Unspeakable, he muttered, to profane my horticultural sanctuary with some Balkan melodrama. Maybe it's a compliment, I suggested. In Montenegro, maybe the Orchid Man is what they call the fellow who always spots the body before anyone else. Nonsense. Wolfe glared down. The phrase is calculated, deliberate. It is an intrusion. Before I could reply, Fritz appeared in the hall below, his robe knotted neat enough for a Swiss parade, hair ruffled in only 3 approved directions. His eyes were sleepy, but his voice carried reproach. Archie, must the telephone ring at such hour? Mr. Wolfe needs his rest. Tell that to Montenegro, I said. Apparently their clocks run late and their enemies run later. Wolfe descended the stairs with the dignity of a wounded mastodon, settled into his chair, and extended a palm. The message, Archie. Reconstruct it exactly. I sat at the desk, pulled a notepad, and wrote the words down. He watched, fingers steepled, eyes closed, lips pressing together until they whitened. When I finished, he opened his eyes. The ledger of Montenegro is not safe. Ask the Orchid Man. Pfui, a concoction of the deranged. Maybe, I said, but men don't usually rehearse their death lines for laughs. Sounded genuine to me. He drummed the desk with thick fingers. The ledger. It suggests accountancy, records, or a book of names. Montenegro implies an émigré, one of the displaced nationalists. Bah! This city breeds them like flies. Why must one of them light upon me? Because, like the fly, he figures you've got the swatter. Archie. Wolfe's tone hardened. Did the man identify himself? Nope, just the accent and the panic. If I had to bet, I'd say he was calling from a booth, maybe east of Broadway, faint streetcar clang in the background. Your ears may one day prove useful. He rang the bell cord. Fritz reappeared instantly, loyal as gravity. Beer, Fritz. Chilled. If I must suffer these interruptions, I will at least not do so parched. Fritz nodded solemnly and padded away. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed again, massive chest rising under the silk. I let him brood, scribbling on the pad. Ledger, Montenegro, Orchid Man. Put them together, and you got either a code or a lunatic crossword puzzle. You know, I said after a stretch, this could be nothing but a drunk with a phone dime. Maybe he flipped through the directory, landed on us, and thought he'd add a little Balkan spice to the night. Wolfe cracked an eye. You believe that? No, but it's a red herring worth keeping in the basket. Fritz returned with the beer on a tray, glass frosted, napkin precise. Wolfe accepted it like a king receiving tribute. He sipped, then pronounced, adequate. The room settled. Midnight fog pressed at the windows. Street lamps burned dull halos into the mist. Somewhere outside, a taxi horn honked, impatient and lonely. Inside, we had orchids upstairs, a disgruntled genius in a robe downstairs, and me wondering if Montenegro would deliver us a corpse by breakfast. Wolfe put the glass down with finality. Archie, instruct the switchboard to connect any further nocturnal lunatics to the river. Sure. Should I also tell Kramer the same thing when he calls around 3? That earned me a glare with the heat of a stovetop. He shifted, robe flaring. Enough. To bed. At 8, precisely, Fritz will rouse me. At 9, I shall attend the orchids. This disturbance will not, must not disarrange my routine. He rose, immense, and lumbered back up the stairs. The robe trailed behind him like a yellow banner of surrender. I stayed at the desk, staring at the notepad with the words, Ledger of Montenegro, scrawled across it. My milk had gone lukewarm, the phone sat quiet, and the house ticked with the sound of Fritz resetting the kitchen clock. Maybe it was a drunk, maybe it was a lunatic. But I've learned that in Wolfe's line of work, men don't often ring at midnight just to chat. More often than not, they're already dead by morning. I folded the note, slid it into Wolfe's drawer, and shut off the lamp. The shadows filled in around me. Trouble had called, left a message, and hung up. And if I knew Manhattan, it wasn't finished. The next morning in the brownstone was as bright and cheery as a tombstone. At 9 o'clock sharp, Wolfe went to his orchids, and I stayed downstairs, chewing over last night's phone call with the same enthusiasm I'd have for a dentist's drill. By 11, he had emerged from the plant rooms and installed himself in the office chair like a monarch returning to the throne after a short war. He wasn't speaking much, which for Wolfe meant the grey cells were turning in circles he didn't yet want me to follow. The phone rang 4 times before lunch. One was a woman asking for the weather, another was a delivery boy with the wrong number, and 2 were crank voices hanging up the instant I said Goodwin. I was starting to think the Montenegrin had friends who enjoyed playing peekaboo with Mabel. At 11:45, Wolfe was scowling at the morning paper, and I was scribbling a note card when the doorbell went off like a fire alarm. It was a special kind of bell, Stebbins persistent, Kramer style. I strolled to the front, peeked through the one-way glass, and wasn't disappointed. Inspector Kramer was on the stoop, hat jammed low, cigar already in mid-battle, jaw locked like he'd been grinding rocks since breakfast. I opened up. Morning, Inspector. You're early for lunch, late for breakfast, but just right for indigestion. Can it, Goodwin, he snapped, brushing past me into the office. His coat smelled of damp wool and his mood of gunpowder. Wolfe didn't rise. He gave Kramer a glance that could have wilted petunias. You pound like a bailiff. To what do we owe the desecration of my threshold? Kramer threw his hat onto the red leather chair and bit down harder on the cigar. Stefan Markovich, you know him? No. Wolfe's voice was as flat as the dictionary. Well, he knew you. We pulled him out of a boarding house cot this morning with a knife in his ribs and your name in his pocket. That got Wolfe to open his eyes a fraction. I gave Kramer the expression I reserve for lunatics and professional wrestlers. Hold on, Inspector. The only Markovich I know is the one who called here last night sounding like he was auditioning for Balkan ghost stories. Said he was about to be killed, remember, boss? Wolfe emitted a growl. Archie, details. So I gave them, midnight, trembling accent, warning about the ledger, that orchid line. Kramer stood there, smoke curling around him, face getting redder. You didn't think to report this to me, he barked. It slipped my mind, I said sweetly. You know how it is when the milk's sour and the boss is in his robe. He ignored me and turned on Wolfe. Why did he call you? I have no idea, Wolfe replied with magisterial calm. Men have called me with many inanities. I do not investigate every lunatic who intrudes on my rest. Kramer slapped his hand on the desk. This one's dead. Found at 4 a.m. east side, rat hole of a boarding house. Knife work. In his pocket was a folded envelope with your name written on it. Empty. You want to explain that? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. No, because I cannot. It was the truth, and it still sounded like a lie. Kramer paced, muttering. Stebbins came in behind him without invitation, bulldog face set. He carried a file and waved it. Markovich was a Montenegrin émigré, lived off odd jobs, stayed at that flop house 3 months. Neighbours say he was scared stiff of someone, wouldn't say who. Last night he tells the landlady he has business uptown, doesn't say where. Stebbins snorted. Looks like it was here. Kramer pointed the cigar at Wolfe. You better not be holding out. If this ties into one of your fancy clients, I'll have you in front of the DA before dinner. Rubbish, Wolfe said, letting the word drop like a stone into a pond. Archie, note the time. I checked my watch. 12:07. Indeed. Inspector, I do not deceive you. The man called, he said nothing coherent, and he died before he could present himself. It is lamentable, but not my doing. Kramer glared, then yanked the cigar out and jabbed it like a spear. If I find out you're involved, I'll drag this whole circus to Center Street. And you, Goodwin, if you're withholding, I'll see you cool your heels in the Tombs. Inspector, I said, the Tombs is no place for a milk drinker. Besides, I like my mattresses without springs sticking through. That earned me a growl. He jammed his hat back on, barked at Stebbins, and stormed out, the front door shaking in his wake. When the echo died, Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz arrived with the composure of a man who had heard raised voices too often to lose sleep over them. Lunch in 10 minutes, Wolfe instructed. Then to me, the envelope, that is disturbing. Empty, though, could have been a grocery list. No, a man does not carry an addressed envelope to his death unless it contained, once, something of value. Wolfe shut his eyes again. Pfui, this is vexing. We must proceed with caution. Do not indulge in fantasies, Archie. Record your notes, every word. So I sat at the desk, typing up the transcript of the midnight call while Wolfe brooded, his fingers drumming on the armrest in slow, heavy rhythm. The clack of the keys felt like gunfire against the silence. By the time Fritz wheeled in lunch, a consommé, delicate trout and fresh rolls, the office smelled less of Kramer's cigar and more of order restored. Wolfe sampled the broth, sighed, and allowed his forehead to uncrease. I sipped my milk, glanced at my notes, and said, Boss, you think the guy really had a ledger, or was he just using the word to sound important? Archie, men seldom die with trivialities on their lips. The word was chosen. It signifies. Okay, but if Kramer's right and this fellow was just another refugee with bad luck, we could be chewing consommé over nothing. Wolfe raised a spoon, his eyes closing in disgust. Pfui, you heard the words. You transcribed them. They will not evaporate with your milk. They oblige us. And that was how it ended. Wolfe with soup, me with notes, and a corpse uptown with an empty envelope. The client hadn't arrived. He never would. But his midnight message had walked straight through our front door, and it wasn't leaving. The Montenegrin Social Club was tucked in a basement on East 92nd, just past a shoemaker's that smelled like old glue and memories. I'd told Wolfe I'd nose around, and he'd granted permission with the kind of regal nod Julius Caesar must have used when sentencing a gladiator. My cover was simple. Archie Goodwin, freelance journalist sniffing out immigrant colour for a Sunday spread. It wasn't much of a disguise. I had the suit and the grin for it. Inside, the air was thick enough to chew. Cigarette smoke hung like fog after a bombing raid, and the schnapps on the tables could have powered an engine. A fiddler scraped out a folk tune in the corner, while men with heavy accents and heavier brows argued about home like they'd left it yesterday instead of 10 years back. I slid onto a wooden chair near the bar and ordered a drink I had no intention of drinking. That was when the first suspect drifted into view. Nikola Vukovic, silk suit, hair slicked like he was auditioning for a Balkan Clark Gable, moved through the room, shaking hands. He had charm to spare, but the kind that came preloaded with escape hatches. He caught me eyeing him, and returned a smile that didn't touch the pupils. "You are writer?" he asked, accent thick but words careful. "Sometimes," I said. "Depends on how much the Gazette pays." He chuckled. but it was the kind of chuckle that checks the exits. America must know Montenegro's spirit. We are brave people, strong people. Strong maybe, but evasive. When I nudged about Stefan Markovich, he shifted the talk to folk songs and the superiority of Balkan lamb stew. He had politician's blood. Then she appeared. Elena Dragan, widow by reputation, draped in a black dress cut to remind you she was still very much alive. Her eyes were sharp as stilettos, lips painted like a warning sign. She drifted to the bar with a glide that made half the men stop mid-argument. She spotted me and arched an eyebrow. "You do not belong here." "Lady, that's the story of my life." She smiled faintly, not for humour, but as if she'd just filed me under temporary. When I mentioned Markovich, her fingers tapped the glass. He was foolish, always chasing ghosts. He should have stayed quiet. "Quiet keeps a man alive," I said. "Not always," she replied, and turned away, leaving me with the faint scent of expensive perfume and cheaper motives. I'd almost written her off as pure distraction when Petar Milic shuffled in. If Vukovic was polished and Elena was lethal glamour, Milic was a wet sponge. Thin, balding, with sweat dripping off him like he'd been running uphill, he clutched a ledger-sized folder to his chest before stuffing it into a satchel. His eyes darted around like he expected everyone to be the executioner. I caught enough of his muttered conversation with a compatriot to note the words accounts and trouble. When I eased closer, his friend hissed, "Shh, not here. The green ledger. It is hidden in America. No tongues." Red herring or not, my ears perked. A ledger, green no less, sounded like it belonged in Wolfe's growing collection of irritations. I jotted a line in my pocket notebook, pretending to sketch the decor. Vukovic noticed, gave me a smile that was 1 part charm and 3 parts warning. "You will write the truth of us, yes? Not lies." "Depends on which sells more copies," I said. That earned me a glare. Elena laughed softly from her stool. Milic excused himself, clutching his satchel like a life-preserver. The smoke thickened, the fiddler sped up, and the schnapps began to hit the men like hammers. I decided I had enough Balkan intrigue for one evening. Wolfe didn't like me out past midnight unless it was on Kramer's leash. On the way out, I caught a final snippet from Vukovic to Elena. "If the Americans find it, everything ends." She nodded, her smile thin and cold. Back at the brownstone, it was pushing 11. Wolfe was, of course, in his chair, book in hand, beer half gone. He didn't look up as I came in. "Well," he said finally. I tossed the notebook onto his desk. 3 suspects in one smoky basement, 1 silk suit with charm, 1 widow with eyes sharp enough to cut rope, and 1 bookkeeper sweating like he'd misplaced his soul. Oh, and someone whispered about a green ledger hidden in America. Wolfe's eyes lifted, heavy and slow. A ledger again. He shut the book with a thump. "Archie, this matter grows less tolerable by the hour. If Montenegro insists on exporting its feuds, why must they be delivered to my door?" "Because, boss, you're the orchid man." He made a sound that was half snort, half sigh, then tugged the bell cord. Fritz arrived with the quiet inevitability of sunrise. "Beer," Wolfe ordered. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and steepled his fingers. That was the end of it for the night. Fritz fetching, Wolfe brooding, and me with the distinct suspicion that the ledger, green, Montenegrin or otherwise, was going to drag us deeper than either of us wanted. Later that night, near 10:30, Saul tapped once, his way. He had a fragment leaving Theodore Horstman to tuck the plants in for the night. Wolfe was planted in the big chair, dictionary on the stand, lips pursed as though he'd spent the evening composing a treaty with the Ottoman Empire. I gave him the report, word for word. Vukovic, silk suit, Eleanor, lethal in black, Milic, sweat and satchel, the whisper about the green ledger. Wolfe didn't interrupt, which meant either I was speaking sense or he was too annoyed at humanity to waste words. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose. Montenegro. He rolled it like a curse. A land of mountains, history, vendettas, and eternal futility. Exiles carry their quarrels abroad like bacilli. They infect whatever soil receives them. "Glad you're keeping an open mind," I said. All I saw was smoke, schnapps, and 3 candidates for nervous breakdowns. He flapped a hand. "Politics? Bah, you were not listening. Ledger, accounts. These men are not assassins of kings, they are scavengers of coin. Money, not patriotism, is the root. I leaned back in the red leather chair, crossing my legs. That may be, but one of those scavengers managed to get himself carved up in a boarding house. You want me to fish out ledgers from every Balkan with a shoebox in New York? His head came up, eyes narrowing. Precisely. Ledgers, bank books, records. You will procure them. Just like that? Knock on doors and ask politely if they're hiding the green ledger of doom. Archie. His tone carried more weight than a safe door. You will contrive. The document exists. It is the fulcrum. I gave him a slow grin. What if the fulcrum tips me into the East River? He sniffed. Phooey, do not be melodramatic. The bell cord twitched under his hand. Moments later Fritz appeared, silent as snowfall, tray in hand. The frosted glass landed on the side table with a soft clink, and Wolfe lifted it reverently. A swallow, a satisfied grunt, and he was ready to resume his lecture. Archie, observe the consistency. First, a man rings with his life at hazard. He speaks of a ledger. Second, at the club. You hear of the green ledger hidden in America. Third, the dead man bore an envelope addressed to me. Empty. The nexus is undeniable. Sure, I said, but don't forget Elena's contribution. She hinted Markovich was chasing ghosts. Maybe the ledger is just one more. A red herring. He drained another gulp. That woman is dangerous, but not a fool. She will not squander her words. If she dismissed Markovich, it was deliberate to conceal her own connection. Before I could press, the phone rang at 10:52. I picked it up. Saul Pantzer's flat, calm voice flowed through. Goodwin, got something. Elena Dragan visited Markovich's boarding house late last night. Witness says she left in a hurry around 11:30. That's less than an hour before he was knifed. I thanked him, hung up, and turned to Wolfe. Well, there you go. Our glamorous widow paid the dead man a midnight call. Wolfe's eyes glittered. Ah, so she is woven deeper. That is consonant. Consonant maybe, but not proof. I leaned across the desk. Boss, I've got to say it. You're dodging. You sit here railing about vendettas while somebody's carving up emigres. If she killed him, she's not going to confess just because you send Fritz to fetch beer. His jaw clenched. Archie. No, listen, you expect me to chase ledgers while you recline like Mount Olympus. Meanwhile, Kramer's pounding the stoop, and I'm the one he threatens with the tombs. You can't just hide in here with orchids and lectures. He slammed the glass onto the tray, beer sloshing. Enough! I will not be hectored like a schoolboy. My methods are mine. If you doubt, then resign. That snapped the air tight. I sat back, gave him the long stare. Sure, I'll resign. Right after Fritz starts answering doors and Theodore starts mixing milk. His lips twitched. The closest Wolfe came to laughter when angry. He grunted, leaned back and shut his eyes. The tension dissolved like sugar in hot tea. Phooey, he muttered again, softer. You will not resign. You will pursue the ledger, that is all. The room settled. Fritz returned, retrieved the tray without a word, and the ritual of order resumed. Wolfe closed his eyes, hands folded over his girth, already drifting toward that meditative state he called thinking. I sat at the desk, flipping my notebook open, the words, Elena, boarding house, 11:30 staring back. Outside, Manhattan's neon blinked against the mist, and somewhere across town, a Balkan widow was probably sipping schnapps and wondering if anyone had seen her knock on the wrong door at the wrong time. I poured myself a glass of milk, raised it to Wolfe's beer, and said, To Montenegro, may it keep exporting trouble straight to our doorstep. He didn't answer. His eyes stayed closed, his breathing steady, and I knew the argument was over. For now. I've been in enough Manhattan penthouses to know they come in two flavors. The nouveau kind, plastered with mirrors and chromium to impress visiting in-laws, and the old money kind, where rugs cost more than the tenant's first house and the air smells like generational disdain. Elena Dragan's suite was something in between, gorgeous enough to make Park Avenue blush, yet with just enough Balkan perfume and gilt edges to scream new money. The elevator opened onto a private foyer thick with roses and heavier with her perfume. The maid, sleek as a dagger, let me in. Then came the widow herself. Elena Dragan floated toward me across a carpet the color of blood oranges, black dress clinging like it had been poured on, dark hair pinned back with a single diamond clip. Her eyes did the work of a firing squad. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, low and accented, "you are not with the police." "That depends on the day," I told her. "Today, I'm just a curious fellow who collects conversations. Yours comes highly recommended." Her smile cut sideways. "Sit. We will have a drink." I took a chair and refused the schnapps she offered. She poured anyway, sipping as though to measure how much longer she could toy with me. The penthouse around us was lush. Thick drapes, marble statues, glass tables with imported magazines, a phonograph murmuring a Balkan lullaby. But glamour doesn't hide menace. It just puts it in heels. "You knew Stefan Markovich," I began. A flick of her eyes. "Yes, poor Stefan. He was foolish. He thought he could keep secrets safe." "Secrets?" "Documents." She leaned forward, voice silk over steel. "He carried things that could ruin powerful men. He dreamed of selling them for fortune. But Stefan was weak. Weak men die quickly." I let that dangle while her smoke curled upward. Then she leaned closer and murmured, "He told me once he had proof, written proof, that your Mr. Wolfe was also involved." I gave her my best incredulous stare. "Lady, that's one of the worst lies I've heard this week, and I've been to 3 press luncheons. Wolfe doesn't get involved. Not with emigre ledgers, not with Balkan brawls, not even with jaywalking." She only smiled wider, like a cat who'd enjoyed the hiss. "Are you sure? Sometimes the orchid man hides more than flowers." It was bait, obvious and shiny, but still it stirred an itch. I leaned back, crossed a leg, and gave her half a grin. "If Wolfe's in the ledger, I'll eat Fritz's soufflé pan raw. Meanwhile, let's stick to facts. You were seen near Markovich's boarding house last night." Her lips pressed together, eyes glittering. "I visit many places. A boarding house?" She waved a manicured hand. "Absurd." That was when I spotted it. On the glass ashtray at her elbow, beneath a stubbed Balkan cigarette, a torn boarding house receipt. The name of the street was just legible in the ash. She followed my eyes, then lazily dropped another cigarette on top of it. "You are clever," she said. "Too clever. Be careful." Careful's my middle name. At least that's what I put on the license. She laughed once, sharp and short. Stefan deserved his end. But me, I'm not foolish. I know when to be silent. "Silence has a price," I said. "And so does truth." She rose, dressed whispering like satin secrets, and crossed to the window. Manhattan's neon bled against the glass, streaking her silhouette. "Tell your Mr. Wolfe that if he digs, he will find danger. Perhaps more danger than even he can eat with his dinner." She let the curtain fall. I stood, smoothing my jacket. "I'll tell him, but I'll add that danger goes down easier with a cold beer." Her eyes flicked back, amused but unshaken. "Good night, Mr. Goodwin." The maid was there again, ushering me out before I could pocket the receipt. I settled for the mental snapshot. Back in a cab, headed downtown, the city blurred in neon and drizzle. Elena Dragan was either playing red herring or holding the frying pan over the fire. She tried to rattle me with Wolfe's name, but the real rattle was that ashtray stub with the boarding house address. Whatever game she was in, she'd already lied twice. By the time I walked into the brownstone, it was 1:45. Wolfe was in his chair, book-balanced, eyelids half shut. Fritz had just cleared a tray with the remnants of cheese straws. "Well?" Wolfe asked without looking up. I dropped into my chair. "She's gorgeous, lethal, and a liar. Says Markovich carried documents to ruin powerful men, then tossed in a whopper about the ledger implicating you. For dessert, I found a torn boarding house receipt in her ashtray." That got his eyes open. He exhaled, slow and irritated. "Phooey, transparent, an attempt to disconcert you. She underestimates my contempt for melodrama." Maybe, but she was there, no doubt. Indeed. He tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared, silent as usual. Wolfe ordered a beer and sipped, expression darkening. "She plays at glamour to mask corruption," Wolfe intoned. "That receipt, more telling than all her words. She is entangled, Archie, deeply, and she seeks to divert suspicion." "Then she's doing a lousy job," I said. "She rattled the cage, but now we've got her prints on the bars." He closed his eyes again, fingers steepled. "We shall see." Fritz set the beer down. Wolfe lifted it, savouring the chilled glass, and I took a swig of milk from my own tumbler. We drank in ritual silence, the king and his jester, one brooding, the other wisecracking, and upstairs the orchids slept on, indifferent to widows, ledgers, or corpses. The brownstone has survived its share of tempests, police, suspects, reporters, and once even a singing telegram that nearly cost me my sanity. But when Inspector Kramer decides to storm our gates, the whole place rattles like a tin shack in a gale. At precisely 10:18 the next morning, I was at my desk typing up last night's excursion when the bell thundered in a way that only one man on Manhattan Island could manage. I didn't need a crystal ball. Kramer announces himself the way a battleship does, by firing everything at once. I swung the door open. There he was, hat jammed low, cigar blazing like a distress flare, face the colour of boiled ham. Behind him loomed Pearly Stebbins, square shoulders and bulldog jowls, carrying a manila folder as though it were the verdict on civilization. Kramer shoved past me. "Where is he?" "In the bathtub," I said. "He likes to soak with a good opera score." "Cut it, Goodwin." He barreled into the office. Wolfe was in his chair, serene as a Buddha who had eaten the rest of the monastery. "Inspector," Wolfe said, voice dry, "your entries grow less civilized by the week." Kramer slammed a crumpled slip of paper on the desk. "Recognize this?" Wolfe adjusted his bulk, peered without touching. I recognized it at once. The same boarding house receipt I'd seen Elena Dragan try to bury under cigarette ash. Kramer jabbed the cigar. "We pulled it from her place. And your man was there last night, wasn't he?" "I go where the orchids send me," I said. "That one was blooming at the penthouse. Don't play dumb. She was at Markovich's before he died. You knew it. You withheld it." Wolfe's lids drooped. "Phooey. Inspector, you and your men seize scraps, then shriek like gulls. What you bury under accusations I prefer to exhume with patience." "Patience? A man's dead, Wolfe." "One man is dead," Wolfe said calmly. "And another." That stopped the room cold. Kramer blinked. "What?" Stebbins stepped forward, voice rough. "We got a second body at dawn. Petar Milik, found in an alley off Houston. Knife work again." He opened the folder and pulled out a plastic envelope. Inside was a ragged half-page, torn down the middle. Inked numbers and Balkan names dotted the column. "Ledger page," Kramer growled. "Half of one, from Millis's wallet." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Ah, so the pestilence spreads." "Spreads?" Kramer nearly choked. "2 bodies in 24 hours and you sit there like it's a crossword puzzle. What are you hiding, Wolfe? What ledger? Who's next?" "I conceal nothing," Wolfe said, voice rising like a gavel. "Your men, blundering through alleys, will bury the truth in their zeal. If you wish me to extricate it, refrain from barking." That hit Kramer's fuse. He leaned across the desk, jabbing the cigar so close Wolfe twitched his nose. "Listen, you oversized windbag. The DA is already breathing down my neck. He wants answers, not lectures on Balkan vendettas. You're obstructing justice, and if you keep it up, I'll slap you with a subpoena so fast you'll wish you'd stayed in Montenegro yourself." I cut in, partly to break the explosion, partly because Wolfe's veins were starting to throb. "Inspector, if Wolfe is obstructing justice, then I'm the Queen of Romania. He's told you everything he knows, which granted is less than you like, but more than you deserve." Stebbins growled. "You watch that mouth, Goodwin." "Better men have tried," I told him. Wolfe lifted a hand. The room froze. "Enough. Inspector, your evidence, this receipt, this torn page, these are fragments. They will lead you in circles until the murderer grows comfortable. You require a fulcrum. That fulcrum is the ledger entire. Until it surfaces, you have nothing but corpses." "And you," Kramer spat. "And me," Wolfe agreed, serene again. "So, leave me to work." Kramer slapped the folder shut. "If I leave you, Wolfe, it's not to work. It's to dig yourself deeper. But I'll tell you this. If another body drops while you're playing chess, the DA will haul you down to Center Street. Orchids be damned." He grabbed his hat, barked at Stebbins, and stormed out, leaving the door to shudder behind him. Silence filled the office. Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz entered, eyes polite, bearing a tray. The beer was poured, cold and golden. Wolfe raised it, sniffed and drank, then let out a long, contented sigh. I said, 2 bodies, half a ledger, 1 widow, 1 silk suit, and 1 inspector ready to melt down. What's next? Wolfe set the glass down. You, Archie. You will find the other half. And if the murderer finds me first? He closed his eyes. Phooey. I drained my milk, watching him sink into silence again. Outside, the city throbbed with neon and menace. Inside, it was beer, orchids, and a Buddha with indigestion. Saul Panzer doesn't knock twice. He taps once, sharp, low, enough to separate him from the milkmen and the bill collectors, and then waits. At 9:47 that evening, that knock came. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, which meant the sacred hours were in effect, and I was left to do the honours. I opened the door, and there he was, flat cap pulled low, rein still glistening on his shoulders, expression as bland as if he'd just walked out of a silent movie. He didn't waste words. Package for Wolfe. Inside, he slipped a folded envelope from his coat. Found it through a fellow who knew Millet. It's the complimentary half of the page the police already have. The margin shows Hale and Company. He didn't bother to add "be careful." Saul knew Wolfe would treat evidence like relics from a saint's shrine. At 10 o'clock, Wolfe came down from upstairs. I had the fragment waiting on his desk. He didn't ask, just extended his palm. With a grunt, he unfolded the paper. The ritual began. Spectacles perched low on his nose, fingers thick yet precise, eyes narrowing. I leaned against the desk corner, arms crossed, watching him as if he were consulting scripture. The page was torn, jagged, ink smeared at one edge, but the writing was clear enough. Numbers in columns, foreign names, and a scrawl in faint pencil along the margin. Hale and Company brokers. Wolfe's lips pressed tight. So, not vendettas, not politics, finance. Wars fought with checkbooks, I said. I guess Montenegro's mountains don't echo with rifles anymore. They echo with stock tips. Bah. He flicked a glance at me. This is laundering. Funds funneled through Wall Street intermediaries. These émigrés are not patriots. They are parasites, attaching themselves to brokers. I leaned down, eyeing the ink. Still, that's a tidy list. Looks like payoffs, regular intervals. Somebody in New York is greasing wheels, and our boys from the Balkans are collecting the shine. He tapped the name with a finger. Hale and Company, a small firm, yet its name appears here. Therefore it is no accident. It is the conduit. He rang the bell cord. Fritz arrived with the quiet inevitability of weather. Wolfe ordered beer. I asked for milk. When Fritz returned, Wolfe lifted his glass and sipped while still staring at the fragment. His bulk filled the chair like a monument planted to outlast dynasties. You will investigate this firm, he pronounced. At once. I raised my glass. Sure. I'll just walk in, say, hello, I'm Archie Goodwin, and I'd like to know which Balkan warlords you're financing today. Should go smooth. His glare could have cracked plaster. Contrive. You have skills, Archie, if you deign to use them. Introduce yourself as a prospective client, or a journalist, or an American fool, whichever requires less rehearsal. Thanks for the vote of confidence. He ignored me, eyes back on the fragment. Observe the sums, not trifles. This is organized, deliberate, extensive. A pattern emerges, payouts on the 15th of each month, each name aligned with a sum. If Markovich possessed the complete ledger, he wielded a weapon. Until someone shoved it back at him point first. Indeed, he drained another swallow. The man's death was inevitable once he carried this. I jotted notes on Wolfe's card index, typing them later for permanence. Evidence in, speculation out. By 10:22 the file read, Ledger fragment, mentions Hale and Company brokers, suggests laundering of funds, key suspect involvement probable. Wolfe leaned back, belly settling like a satisfied lion's. So, we progress. A ledger half reveals rot beneath a respectable name. We must have the rest. And how do you propose we get it? Asked Kramer nicely. He emitted a rumble. Kramer will stumble. He will see numbers but not connections. You will go to Hale's office. Tomorrow, before noon. Fritz will contrive to delay lunch if you are late. That was as close to generosity as Wolfe ever came. I closed the file drawer and said, Fine, but if I come back with more than paper, say, another corpse, don't blame me for indigestion. He raised the glass again. Phooey. The office quieted. Outside, neon bled into the mist. Inside, Wolfe sipped beer and stared at ink that could topple men as surely as bullets. And I had tomorrow's marching orders, walk into Wall Street dressed as a client, and find out which American broker had decided to bankroll the Balkans. When you've spent as much time as I have knocking on doors for Nero Wolfe, you learn that Manhattan has 1,000 ways to say money. There's the quiet hum of Park Avenue apartments, the glitter of Fifth Avenue shops, and then there's Wall Street, where marble floors and ticking clocks make it clear you're standing inside the country's circulatory system, and the blood is cash. At 10:04 a.m., I walked into Hale & Company, a modest broker's firm tucked into a granite building off Broad Street. I'd shaved closer than usual and pressed my suit just enough to look like a man shopping for a portfolio instead of a murder. The lobby reeked of polish and fear. A clerk behind the counter tried to paste on a smile, but it cracked under the weight of whatever was brewing inside. "I'm here to see Mr. Hale," I told him, "or whichever senior wizard of finance is still breathing." The clerk twitched. "Mr. Hale, he's in back." He didn't say alive. That was my first clue. The second came when a scream sliced out of the office corridor. I moved fast, through a brass-handled door and down the hall, into a room that was part ledger heaven, part bullet purgatory. There he was, Charles Hale, partner, and, according to Saul Pantzer's notes, cousin to one Nikola Vukovic. He was slumped in his leather chair, head tilted, mouth frozen mid-protest. The hole in his chest said the protest hadn't gotten far. Papers littered the floor like autumn leaves, and the safe behind him gaped open. 2 clerks hovered near the door, white as ghosts. One muttered, "It was foreigners. I swear it. Foreigners came in earlier, arguing, loud." He clamped up the second he saw me. I knelt, eyes sweeping. Wolfe's voice was always in my head during moments like this. Observe, note, record. The papers scattered across the rug weren't just stock reports. Some bore Cyrillic handwriting. One ledger page, corner torn, showed dates and sums that lined up with the fragment we already had. But the gem sat in the desk drawer, half pulled out by whoever had started to search. A sealed envelope, neat handwriting across it. Madame Elena Dragan. Well, well. Our widow was cashing checks in more places than schnapps bars. The air grew tighter. Behind me, the office filled with noise. Clerks whispering, a secretary weeping, the tick of a clock on the wall keeping perfect time with Hale's stopped heart. I pocketed a note in my book. 10:17 a.m., Charles Hale shot, envelope to Elena. I backed away just as the cavalry arrived, 2 uniforms, pistols drawn, ordering everyone out. I raised my hands like a good citizen and flashed my license card. "Goodwin," I told them, licensed, bonded, and currently wishing I'd stayed in bed. "Where's Kramer?" "On his way," one cop muttered, already eyeing the corpse like he wanted to pin it on me. I left my card with the uniforms and ducked out before they decided to add me to the blotter. The street outside smelled of wet stone and anxiety. Men in hats whispered, looking up at the office windows like Hale & Company had just announced the market was closed forever. By 11:02, I was back at the brownstone, reporting. Wolfe was in his chair, still savouring the orchids from his morning session. When I laid it out, the corpse, the chaos, the envelope, his eyes shut tight, hands steepled. 3 deaths, he intoned. Markovich, Millix, and now Hale, each connected by the ledger. This is no vendetta, Archie, this is eradication. "Somebody's cleaning house," I said, "and our widow's name is on the guest list." He tapped the armrest. "The envelope, describe it." Standard stationery, neat, sealed. His hand, I think. Addressed to Elena Dragan. No stamp, meant for hand delivery. Wolfe grunted. "Then she is not merely an accessory. She is a fulcrum. Hale's link to the circle. Why does he write to her? Why address her thus? Phooey." The phone rang at 11:09. I grabbed it. Kramer, voice like a sandblaster. "Goodwin, you were at Hale's office." "I get around," I said. "Don't wise off. Hale's dead. Shot clean through, you see it. Front row seat, but I didn't get to fire the starting pistol." "Stay put. I'm coming over." I hung up, turned to Wolfe. "Brace yourself. Kramer's about to make the walls rattle." Wolfe sighed like Atlas deciding whether to keep holding the world. Then let him rattle, but he will listen. At 11:26, the bell exploded. I let Kramer in. He came barreling, cigar already chewing his lip, Stebbins behind him, looking smug. "You," Kramer barked at me. "You contaminate a crime scene, then run here. And you," he jabbed at Wolfe, "you sit fat while bodies pile up." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And what have you accomplished? 3 deaths, no arrests, and your only theory a phantom foreigner. You require intellect. That is why you are here, though you cannot admit it." Kramer nearly detonated. He slapped the envelope on Wolfe's desk, the one I'd mentioned. "We found this. You knew about it." "I did," Wolfe admitted calmly. "My assistant observed it. And didn't hand it over. Because," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing, "you would have dismissed it, or mishandled it, whereas I shall read it with the seriousness it demands." "You're obstructing." "No, I'm deducing." Stebbins growled. "Maybe you're covering for her. That Dragon dame's got you hypnotized." I leaned on the desk, grinning. "Trust me, Pearlie, Wolfe doesn't hypnotize easy. Try it sometime. You'll get fweed out the door." Wolfe raised his hand. "Enough. Inspector, your foreigner theory is misdirection. This is not émigré blood feud. It is financial corruption. Someone silences any who might expose the laundering. Hale, being conduit, became liability. Elena Dragon is the next link." Kramer puffed like a locomotive. "Then give me something solid." Wolfe spread his hands. "I require the complete ledger. Until then, we are shadows chasing shadows. Archie will secure it." "Your boy better," Kramer snapped, "or I'll haul him in for tampering." He jammed the cigar back in his teeth, spun, and stormed out, Stebbins clomping behind. When the door slammed, silence reclaimed the room. Wolfe tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared, bearing the midday tray, bread, cold cuts, and Wolfe's second beer. Wolfe lifted the glass, eyes glinting. "Archie, this has shifted. We no longer hunt a murderer. We hunt an eradicator. And he, or she, has not finished." I sipped my milk, shrugged. "Then we'd better find that ledger before the eradicator decides we're next on the cleanup list." Wolfe's orchid rooms are 3 degrees hotter than a Turkish bath, and about as comfortable for a man in a suit. At 9:05 the next morning, I was standing there with my collar wilting while Wolfe prowled the aisles in his white smock, looking more like a high priest than a detective. Theodore Horstman was at the far bench misting a row of cattleyas with the solemnity of a man christening infants. The orchids, all 10,000 of them, swayed gently under the humidifiers. They were delicate, expensive, and ruthless, just like the case we were drowning in. Wolfe's fingers brushed a bloom as if it might whisper the secret he hadn't cracked yet. 3 deaths, he said, voice low. Markovic, Milik, Hale, each tethered to a ledger. 1 widow, central, elusive. 1 pattern. Patterns, Archie, are life. Patterns are also wallpaper, I said, and right now, all I see is blood spatter. He turned, scowl dripping from him like perspiration. "You are frivolous." "No," I said, "I'm worried. Last night we added a Wall Street broker to the casualty list. If the killer's on a schedule, maybe we're the matinee." Theodore coughed politely, mist still hissing. Wolfe ignored him, eyes narrowing. "The ledger fragment. You recall the notations?" "Sure. Columns of numbers, Balkan names, Hale and Company scribbled in the margin." "The handwriting," Wolfe said, stabbing the air with a finger, "is feminine. Hale did not write it. A secretary's hand. Distinctive loops, the flourish on the H. It matches Lydia Clark, Hale's secretary." That was news worth filing. I jotted it in my notebook, sweat dripping on the page. "Then she copied the entries," I said. "But why? Hale trusted her?" "Or she feared him," Wolfe said. "Either way, she is entangled." I wiped my forehead. "Fine. Entangled. So what do we do? Sit here and admire the dendrobiums while another corpse gets added to the set?" That did it. Wolfe spun on me, face crimson. "Enough! You badger me, Archie. You rush me. I will not be stampeded like cattle. If you press me further, I will withdraw. Entirely." It landed heavy. Wolfe threatening to quit a case was like the Statue of Liberty threatening to move to New Jersey. I held my hands up. "Easy. Nobody's driving cattle. But you can't keep folding your arms while people fold up like cheap umbrellas. You owe Markovic at least. He died trying to reach you." "Pfui!" Wolfe's voice cracked like a whip. He died because he was a fool. Do not burden me with sentiment. If clients deceive, if circumstances insult me, I owe nothing. Nothing. The orchids loomed over us, innocent and pitiless. Theodore turned away, fussing with a sprayer as though Manhattan's safety depended on moisture levels. I stepped closer. Boss, listen. If you walk away now, Kramer will eat us alive. The Gazette will write you up as the fat man who ducked while Montenegrins died. You'll have orchids, yes, but the stink will crawl in here with the fertilizer. Wolfe's nostrils flared. He hated press ridicule worse than draft beer. You are insufferable, he muttered. Maybe, but I'm right. Silence stretched. Only the hiss of the misting nozzles filled it. Wolfe's hands stroked the petals of a rare Miltonia, eyes closing. Finally he sighed, long and heavy. Very well. I will not withdraw. Not yet. That was as close as I'd get to victory. Good, I said, because we've got a secretary's handwriting pointing a finger, a widow stacking up lies, and a ledger slicing men down like a scythe. We need traction, not tantrums. His eyes opened, hard as glass. Choose your words with care, Archie. My patience is not inexhaustible. I grinned, wiping more sweat. Sure, I'll file that under warning shots. At 10 o'clock sharp, Wolfe doffed the smock and lumbered toward the elevator. Theodore bowed his head as if the Pope had left Mass. I followed, notebook tucked, relief dripping as much as the humidity. Back in the office, Wolfe lowered himself into the chair with a grunt. He tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared, poised, bearing the morning tray. Beer for Wolfe, milk for me. Wolfe lifted his glass. Archie, take this down. Oath. We pursue until the ledger is found, and the truth with it. I raised my milk. Amen to that. Though if the orchids start swearing oaths, I'm leaving town. He shut his eyes, savouring the beer. The case wasn't solved, not by a mile, but at least the fat man was still in the fight. When you want information from a secretary, you don't kick down the door. You offer a smile, a steady tone, and just enough charm to make her forget the badge she doesn't see. Later that day, at 11:32, I was in the outer office of Hale & Company, which was running on fumes and whispers since the boss had been ventilated at his desk. Lydia Clark sat at a typewriter that hadn't clacked since the day before. Late 20s, plain skirt, sensible shoes, but a pair of grey eyes that said she'd been cataloguing secrets long before Wall Street gave her a desk. Her fingers twisted at the corner of a blotter. Miss Clark, I said, tipping my hat. I'm Archie Goodwin, private investigator. Before you freeze, don't worry, I'm not here to pin anything on you. I'm here to help keep you out of the crosshairs. Her lips trembled. The police, Inspector Kramer. He asked questions. I told him I didn't know anything. Sure you did, I said lightly. And you almost believed yourself. But let's try the version you'd tell at midnight if you couldn't sleep. She swallowed. Mr. Hale, he told me to copy from a ledger. He wouldn't let me ask questions, said it was bookkeeping, nothing more. But then, she lowered her voice, then Madame Dragon came. She told me I must write copies for her too, that if I refused I would lose my job, or worse. The name landed like a coin in a tin cup. Elena again. I leaned on the desk. So, she had you transcribing. Why? Her eyes darted. Blackmail. She said these names, men from the clubs, émigrés. They had money hidden, dealings they could not explain. She said she would use the ledger to keep them quiet. That was a new wrinkle. The widow wasn't just a glamorous ornament. She was bookkeeping for extortion. I pressed. And Markovich? She hesitated, then whispered. He was double-dealing. I think he tried to sell the ledger to rivals. Madame Dragon hated him for it. That is why. She trailed off, clutching the blotter. Red herring or not, it added spice to the stew. Where is the full ledger now? I asked. Her voice shook. Not here. There is a safety deposit box. Fifth Avenue Trust under Madame Dragon's name. I've seen the key. That was enough to make Wolfe sit up straighter when I brought it home. I thanked her, left my card, and promised no one would know she'd cracked. As I left, the clerk stared as if I'd just stolen the company silver. Back at the brownstone at 12:25, Wolfe was in his chair, lunch waiting on the sideboard. Fritz hovered, protective as a Swiss hawk. Wolfe looked up, eyebrows arched. Well? I gave him the scoop. Lydia Clark forced by Hale and Elena, ledger copies, blackmail, safety deposit box, and the side note about Markovich double-dealing. Wolfe tapped the armrest. Phooey. Markovich may have been reckless, but that tale smacks of diversion. Still, instructive. I poured myself a glass of milk. So Elena's ledger isn't just a record. It's a choke chain. She's been milking émigrés dry. Wolfe's eyes glinted. Precisely. She is predator, not prey. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz stepped forward, uncovered the trout and sauce, and Wolfe speared a bite. "And the deposit box?" I asked. "We must confirm," Wolfe said. "But first, lunch." I sighed, flipping open my notebook. Another body might drop before dessert, but Wolfe never let danger interfere with trout. That was the close of the chapter. Orchids upstairs, trout on the plate, and one secretary's secret tying the widow's hand to the ledger's key. Dinner at Wolfe's wasn't just a meal, it was a ceremony with more steps than a Broadway chorus line. Fritz staged it the way the Met staged an opera, with courses timed to Wolfe's mood and sauces designed to smooth over humanity's rough edges. On that particular evening at 8 o'clock sharp, the ritual was a little too serene for my liking. We had 3 corpses in the till, a ledger fragment burning holes in Wolfe's desk drawer, and Elena Dragan fluttering her lashes like Matahari, yet there he sat, eyes half-lidded, working his way through pheasant under a sauce that could have made a condemned man cheerful. I'll give Fritz this. The pheasant was perfection. Crisp skin, tender meat, and a sauce with enough wine in it to give the bird opinions. He served it with little Duchess potatoes and braised endive. Wolfe handled his knife and fork like a surgeon, every movement precise, deliberate. He ate as if corpses and ledgers didn't exist, as if the only mystery worth solving was why Fritz's béarnaise never broke. I tried not to fidget, but patience has never been my strong suit. Finally, I pushed my plate away and lit a cigarette. "Boss, you'll forgive me if I don't applaud the pheasant. My appetite's been wrecked by the small matter of people dropping dead faster than Kramer can light a cigar. Don't you think it's about time you stopped chewing and started talking?" He dabbed his lips with a napkin, swallowed a mouthful of burgundy, and regarded me as if I were a wasp buzzing near the sugar bowl. "Archie, your impatience is intolerable. Eating is not ancillary to my work. It is essential. A man who feeds his body properly prepares his mind for clarity." "Sure," I said. Meanwhile, the killer's feeding the morgue. His eyes narrowed, but the corners of his mouth twitched. For Wolfe, that was a chuckle. He set his utensils down and leaned back, pressing his fingertips together. "You mistake haste for progress. 3 men are dead, each tethered to a ledger of clandestine transactions. The pattern, Archie, is becoming plain." "Plain to you, maybe. To me, it looks like a blood-spattered jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing." He ignored me, which is standard operating procedure when he's about to unveil the theory of the week. "The ledger is not about émigrés alone. These Balkan exiles are not the primary actors. They are conduits, pawns. The true hands are American financiers, men who launder funds, channel them through Wall Street brokers, and use émigré names as camouflage." I whistled low. "So we're not talking about schnapps money in a club basement. We're talking about big fish in pinstripes." "Precisely." He took another deliberate sip of wine. Hale was one such conduit. His cousin Nikola Vukovic exploited the connection. Markovich was courier, Milik was accountant. And Madame Dragan, she is the spider at the centre weaving threads between them. She did not merely use the ledger to blackmail émigrés, she linked them to American accomplices. I leaned forward. Then why is she still walking around with diamonds on her ears instead of handcuffs on her wrists? "Because," Wolfe said, voice dropping, "she is not yet vulnerable. The ledger entire is the weapon. Until it is in hand, she cannot be struck." That sent my temper climbing. "So your plan is to sit here, polish off pheasant, and wait for her to hand-deliver it with a bouquet. Meanwhile, she's out there scrubbing names off the ledger the old-fashioned way, with bullets." Wolfe glared, but before he could thunder, the phone rang at 8:42. I crossed to it and picked up. Saul Pantzer's voice came calm and flat as if he were reporting a bus schedule. "Goodwin, confirmed. Elena Dragan visited Hale's office the night he was shot. Dorman saw her leave just before midnight, Didn't mention it to police until I pressed him. I thanked him, hung up, and turned to Wolfe. There you go. She was there right before the trigger got pulled. Wolfe didn't blink. Consonant, he said softly. It harmonizes with the rest. Consonant? I barked. She was practically holding the pistol. What more do you need, a signed affidavit? Phooey. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. You leap, I deduce. She was there, yes, but that does not prove she killed Hale. It proves she was complicit in business with him. Nothing more. I threw up my hands. Wonderful. She's innocent until proven guilty, while the body count keeps the undertakers happy. Fritz entered silently to clear plates and replace them with a salad course. Greens dressed so lightly they could have floated. Wolfe speared a leaf and chewed with majestic calm. I thought about hurling the salad bowl at him, but Fritz would have fainted. You see, Archie, Wolfe continued, if I act prematurely, I court disaster. The DA will demand evidence, the police will blunder, the widow will vanish, and the financiers will remain hidden. No, I must have the ledger, entire. With it I can unravel the scheme and name the murderer. And until then? He leaned back, belly stretching the vest buttons. Until then, we wait and eat. I stared at him, furious and helpless. You'll forgive me if I don't find that comforting, because right now, boss, it looks like you're hiding behind Fritz's sauces while Madame Dragon counts bullets. He closed his eyes, lifting his hand like a traffic cop. Enough. Your tongue is acid. Silence. That shut me up, but only because I knew pushing harder would make him retreat entirely. Fritz appeared with dessert, a delicate soufflé that smelled like vanilla heaven, and Wolfe accepted it as if the world hadn't tilted. I didn't touch mine. I poured a glass of milk, scribbled notes on my pad instead. Elena confirmed at Hale's office. Ledger equals American financiers. Wolfe waiting. The office was thick with silence except for Wolfe's slow chewing. Outside, the city buzzed, neon flashing off wet asphalt, taxi horns bleating like restless cattle. Inside, the only rhythm was the scrape of silver on porcelain and Wolfe's maddening calm. When he finished, Fritz whisked the plates away. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed, voice deep and steady. Archie, you will continue your inquiries tomorrow. Begin with the bank. The safety deposit box must be confirmed. Only then will we advance. And what if Kramer barges in before breakfast with a warrant and a squad car? Then, Wolfe said, we shall endure his noise and ignore it. He tugged the bell cord, and Fritz returned with Wolfe's evening beer, frosted glass gleaming. Wolfe lifted it in a solemn toast to himself. I raised my milk and muttered, Here's to waiting while the world burns. He shut his eyes, savouring the beer. For him, it was the calm before a storm. For me, it was purgatory with silverware. The Montenegrin club sat on East 10th like a relic smuggled across the Atlantic in a steamer trunk. From the outside, it was a brick box with a chipped sign, but inside, past the green baize door, it might as well have been a Balkan pocket square folded into Manhattan's jacket. Smoke hung thick enough to butter, violins screeched out folk songs I couldn't pronounce, and the schnapps on every table smelled like it had been distilled in a basement with more courage than copper. I arrived at 9:12 that night, trenchcoat damp from a drizzle that couldn't make up its mind whether it was rain or fog. Wolfe had told me to bluff, which meant I'd be risking my neck while he stayed home with orchids. The plan was simple. Tell them I had the ledger, then see which one broke a sweat first. Simple, yes. Safe, no. Inside, eyes followed me as I crossed the room. Men with thick moustaches and thicker suspicions, women with shawls and sharp gazes. At the far table sat Nikola Vukovic, silk suit creased, rings flashing, a glass raised like a king toasting his own reflection. Beside him, Elena Dragan reclined like a painting in too much perfume, lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I pulled out a chair uninvited. Evening. Hope you don't mind. I brought news. Nicola's eyes narrowed. You are Goodwin, the American dog who works for the fat detective. That's me, I said, leaning back. Archie Goodwin, messenger, milk drinker, and tonight's entertainment. I came to tell you I've got the ledger. That landed like a grenade in a convent. Forks froze, voices dropped, and Nicola lurched forward, fists slamming the table. Lies, Elena laughed low and amused. Oh, let him talk, Nicola. Americans love their boasts. I smiled at her. Boasts, sure, but this one comes with proof. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folded sheaf of blank paper wrapped in string. The room tensed. Nicola half rose, then stopped, his eyes flicking to Elena. She blew smoke from a slim cigarette, eyes gleaming. So brave, Mr. Goodwin, to walk in here waving death in your pocket. Bravery, stupidity, it's a fine line, I said. But here's the thing. This ledger, it's dynamite. Names, sums, bank accounts. And it doesn't just point to émigrés crying into their schnapps. It points to Americans, partners. Someone here has been funneling money, and the police are itching to know who. Nicola's hand twitched toward the paper. Give it to me. I leaned back, folding it away. Not so fast. You lunge, I scream, and the cops come in waving warrants, which, by the way, they already have. As if on cue, the door burst open at 9:27. Pearlie Stebbins lumbered in, hat shoved back, eyes scanning like a bulldog sniffing meat. He barked, "Break it up! Nobody leaves!" Nicola froze. Elena didn't flinch. She just smiled wider, amused as a cat at a canary convention. Stebbins stomped over. "What's this about a ledger?" "Just story time," I said smoothly. "I was telling bedtime tales to our Balkan friends. Keeps them honest," Nicola snarled. "He lies. He seeks to trap us." Elena tapped her cigarette ash, cool as winter. "Nicola, darling, control yourself. Mr. Goodwin's little performance is charming, but if he had the ledger, he would not be breathing." Her calm was more chilling than Nicola's rage. I caught something else too, fear in Nicola's eyes, not of me, but of someone larger. He muttered under his breath, "The American partner will not forgive this." I locked that phrase in my notebook. American partner. The missing piece Wolfe had predicted. Stebbins jabbed a finger. "You're all coming downtown." Elena tilted her head. "On what charge, Sergeant?" "Obstruction. Conspiracy, maybe breathing too hard," I said. "Kramer will figure it out. He's good at yelling until answers fall out." The club had gone silent except for the violin squeaking in the corner. Men glared, women whispered, schnapps glasses trembled. I'd stirred the pot all right. Elena rose gracefully, smoothing her dress. "Mr. Goodwin, you are reckless, but reckless men are sometimes useful. Tell your Wolfe that if he wishes truth, he must look closer to home. Not all Americans are as innocent as their milk." She brushed past, perfume trailing, Stebbins growling but not stopping her. Nicola followed, muttering, throwing me a look of pure venom. By 9:48 the room emptied. I was left with Stebbins scowling at me. "You nearly got knifed, Goodwin." "Nearly," I said, "but nearly doesn't count." He shook his head and stomped out, muttering about paperwork. I stepped into the drizzle again, trench coat collar up, neon from the bar sign bleeding across the wet pavement. Another night, another close shave, another breadcrumb for Wolfe. Back at the brownstone by 10:22, Wolfe was in his chair, beer in hand, looking like a man expecting a report and a tray of Fritz's pastries. I gave him both, minus the pastries. "Boss," I said, "the bluff worked." Nicola nearly had a coronary, Elena laughed like the joke was on me, and Stebbins stormed in waving the law. But Nicola dropped a gem. He muttered about the American partner. Whoever that is, they're the big cheese behind the ledger. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. At last, the fulcrum. The émigrés are shadows. The partner is substance. We shall find him, Archie, and when we do, we shall end this. He closed his eyes, savouring his beer. I poured a glass of milk and sat, thinking how close I'd come to getting my ledger and my obituary in the same night. The Gazette's newsroom always smelled like ink, smoke, and desperation. That's Lon Cohen's kingdom, and he ruled it the way a bartender rules a joint where the customers never leave. By keeping the drinks coming, only here the drinks were headlines. At 10:06 the next morning, I was perched on the corner of his desk while he chain-smoked over proofs. "Archie," Lon said without looking up, "you've got yourself a hell of a storm. 3 dead foreigners, 1 dead broker, and my city desk screaming for copy. You gonna let me print Wolfe's name or not?" "Print it and I'll sue," I told him. "But if you behave, I'll give you a crumb. Something's stirring on Wall Street." He slid me a look. "Whispers say a big name is tied up in this. Not Hale, he was a small fry. I'm talking about Charles Denton. Ever hear of him? I whistled. Denton was no nickel and dime operator. He ran one of those firms that looked like it could buy half of Europe and still have enough left for the dessert cart. Lon leaned closer. Word is, Denton's been seen near that Dragon widow. You want your lead? There it is. I thanked him, slid off the desk, and left before he could squeeze me for details. At 11:23, I was outside Denton and Company, marble pillars gleaming, clerks swarming like bees in grey suits. Denton's office was on the top floor, with a secretary who looked like she could sort wheat from chaff at 50 paces. Mr. Denton is occupied, she sniffed. So am I said, flashing Wolfe's card. That carried enough weight to earn me a glare and a grudging nod toward the inner door. Charles Denton rose to greet me. Tall silver hair, smile polished like a campaign poster. His handshake was dry and strong. Mr. Goodwin, I've heard of you. I've heard of you too, I said, settling in. But lately I hear your name in places that aren't so flattering. Balkan clubs, widows' penthouses, murder scenes. His smile didn't flicker. Gossip is a disease, Mr. Goodwin. I don't indulge. I leaned forward. Then why did witnesses see you visiting Elena Dragon last week? That got a twitch, just a flicker at the eye. He recovered fast. Social courtesy. Her late husband was an acquaintance, nothing improper. Improper? No. Convenient, maybe, considering Markovich, Millix, and Hale all ended up cold before their time. His voice hardened. Careful, Goodwin. Accusations are ugly. I lit a cigarette, let the smoke drift. So's murder, but let me try a different angle. Ever hear the phrase, the orchid man? For the first time, the mask slipped. His lips parted, eyes flashing with recognition before he snapped it shut. What nonsense is this? Funny thing, I said softly. Only a few people knew Wolfe and his orchids well enough to bait him. But Markovich used the phrase on the phone the night he died. That means someone planted it in his ear, someone who knew it would get Wolfe's attention, and that someone, Denton, is looking at me right now. He stood, too fast. I won't be insulted in my own office. Sit down, I told him low, or I'll walk out and give Kramer your name wrapped in headlines, and the Gazette will print it twice as loud. He sank back, trembling just a shade. You think you're clever, but you don't understand. These men, Markovich, Millix, they were liabilities. They jeopardized investments. Investments with Balkan names and American dollars, I said. Was Hale a liability too? His silence was enough. I stubbed out my cigarette and stood. You're done, Denton. I'll let Wolfe tie the bow, but we both know you're the American partner, and you've been playing both sides until the body's stacked too high. He tried a sneer. Prove it. That's Wolfe's department. My department is telling him you flinched at orchids. I left him there, sweating behind mahogany, and by 12:40 I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe was finishing lunch, saddle of lamb, Fritz beaming. He looked up, eyebrows arched. Report. I gave it to him clean. Lon's tip, Denton's visit to Elena, his denial, and the slip when I mentioned orchids. Wolfe's eyes gleamed like a cat spotting cream. Phooey, he murmured. So obvious, and yet so concealed. Denton is our orchid man. He lured Markovich to mention me. He sought to draw me in, to distract, to misdirect. It is brilliant in conception, foolish in execution. I poured milk, shook my head. So what now? Do we call Kramer and let him pound his desk? No. We set the stage. Denton, Eleanor, Vukovic, they will come here. And here I shall dismantle them, piece by piece. I leaned back, grinning. Good. Because I'm running out of clean suits, and another night in the Balkan Club might finish me before the bullets do. Wolfe closed his eyes, reaching for his beer. Then prepare, Archie. The end approaches, and it will end here, as always. If Wolfe's office had ever been converted into a courtroom, no judge in Manhattan could have competed. The setting was perfect. The heavy walnut desk for the bench, Wolfe enthroned behind it like justice herself in slippers, and me playing clerk, bailiff, and usher rolled into one. By 8:04 that evening, the stage was set. I'd arranged chairs in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk. The orchids glowed in the background, pale and ghostly through the open door to the plant rooms, as if summoned for silent testimony. Fritz had seen to the props, beer chilling in its tray, polished glasses ready for Wolfe's cue. I had a glass of milk for myself, which earned me a sniff from Nikola Vukovic when he saw it. He, Elena Dragan, Miss Lydia Clark and Charles Denton occupied the chairs, each radiating nerves in a different flavour. Elena leaned back, cigarette in hand, amused. Nikola perched forward, sweaty and sullen. Miss Clark twisted her handkerchief to threads, and Denton sat upright, face locked in a politician's smile that had begun to tremble at the corners. Kramer stood by the door, cigar clenched like a weapon, while Stebbins anchored the wall with his bulldog bulk. The room smelled of tobacco, perfume, and tension. At 8:10 sharp, Wolfe raised his hand. Silence fell. His voice emerged low, deliberate, carrying the weight of the room with it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you are here not by whim but by necessity. 3 deaths shadow us, Markovich, Millix, Hale, and a trail of émigrés trembling in fear. The fulcrum is a ledger, half seen, half hidden, yet potent enough to cost lives. Tonight we shall settle which among you is its true master, and which is its slave." Elena exhaled smoke and smiled. "How dramatic, Mr. Wolfe. You should have been on the stage." "I am on the stage, madam," Wolfe replied, eyes narrowing, "and you are playing your part. Be silent." That clipped her wings. He gestured to me. "Archie, the fragment." I handed it over. Wolfe adjusted his spectacles, spreading the torn paper on the desk. "These figures, copied by Miss Clark at Hale's instruction, show payments routed through Hale and Company, funds originating with émigré groups, ending in American accounts. They were not the Patriots' support of causes abroad, but laundering, money for influence, power, perhaps arms. Markovich was courier, entrusted to carry the ledger itself. Millix, accountant, kept its balance. Hale, conduit, greased it through Wall Street. Kramer snorted. "And they all wound up dead. So who killed them?" Wolfe's head swiveled. "Patience, Inspector, I arrive." He continued, voice rising like a tide. "Madame Dragan, your beauty masks your hunger. You demanded copies. You saw the ledger as weapon, not duty. You threatened Miss Clark here with dismissal if she refused to transcribe. You intended blackmail, names, sums, secrets, a profitable scheme." Elena blew another curl of smoke. "Speculation. Pretty words, but no proof." "Phooey, proof enough," Wolfe thundered. "You admit you visited Hale's office the night he died." Her shoulders rose in a shrug. "A visit, nothing more. When I left, he was alive." Wolfe's glare turned to Nikola. "And you, sir? A peacock in silk, yet hollow. You used Hale's blood ties to enrich yourself. You urged Markovich to guard the ledger, then panicked when he threatened to defect. You muttered of an American partner, and indeed there was one." Nikola's fists clenched. "Lies. You accuse because I am foreign. Always it is the foreigner." "Not always," Wolfe said, voice sharp. "Not tonight." He turned to Denton, who stiffened. "Charles Denton, a man of stature, of standing, of wealth. You, sir, were the American partner. Hale was but conduit. You were architect. You saw émigrés as camouflage, their accents as shields. You profited while they perished. And when cracks appeared, Markovich wavering, Millix whispering, Hale doubting, you silenced them with bullets." Denton leapt to his feet. "This is slander." "Sit," Wolfe ordered, voice like a gavel. And Denton, for all his bluster, sat. Kramer barked. "You got proof, Wolfe? More than hot air?" "Indeed." Wolfe leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Markovich's dying call reached my house. He spoke of the orchid man. Only a handful know my obsession. Markovich did not. The phrase was planted in his mouth, to lure me, to embroil me, to distract me from the true quarry. Who planted it? The one man among you who had reason and opportunity. Denton." Denton's face drained. "Nonsense. Coincidence." "No," Wolfe said, voice rising. "You betrayed yourself to Goodwin when he mentioned orchids. You flinched. You knew the phrase. You alone. That is not coincidence. It is confession." The room erupted. Nikola shouting in Montenegrin, Elena laughing low and bitter, Miss Clark sobbing into her handkerchief. Kramer strode forward, cigar clamped, snapping his fingers. Stebbins moved like a tank, yanking Denton to his feet. Denton broke then, the polished mask shattering. "They would have ruined me," he shouted. Markovich wanted more money. Milik threatened exposure. Hale lost his nerve. I had to— Pfui, Wolfe roared, shaking the desk. You had to feed your greed. You dressed murder in necessity. Do not insult us with justification. Kramer shoved Denton toward the door. That's all I needed. Denton, you're done. Try explaining it to the DA with a jury staring at you. Elena rose, eyes glittering. So clever, Mr. Wolfe. And yet you leave me standing. Did I not profit too? You profited, Wolfe said coldly. But you did not kill. You lacked the steel. You relied on men to bloody their hands while you schemed with paper. You will answer to the law for blackmail, perhaps, but not for murder. Her smile faded, smoke curling upward like surrender. Wolfe sat back, tugging the bell cord. Fritz entered, bearing the tray. Wolfe lifted his beer with solemnity. Inspector, your murderer. Savour it with your cigar. Kramer growled, snapping at Stebbins to haul Denton out. As the door slammed behind them, silence returned. Wolfe sipped his beer, eyes closed. I leaned back, glass of milk raised. Well, boss, you've done it again. Orchids, beer, and a murderer trust for Centre Street. Just another Tuesday night. He grunted. Pfui. And that was the curtain. Orchids glowing in the background, Wolfe enthroned, and the city outside still humming with rain and neon. The brownstone has its own climate, and I don't just mean the orchids sweating upstairs. It's the rhythm of the place. Orchids at 11, lunch at 1, beer at set hours. By the time a case closes, the brownstone exhales like it's been holding its breath. And after the Balkan Circus had paraded through and out again, that's exactly how it felt. A house that had survived a storm, now content to sit back with a sandwich. It was 11:47 that night when I dropped into my chair opposite Wolfe. The office had settled into post-war peace, lamplight glowing on the walnut, rain tapping the windows, and the faint smell of Fritz's rye bread wafting from the kitchen. Wolfe was finishing his midnight beer with the solemnity of a man drinking a peace treaty. You realize, I said, pouring myself milk, that if orchids were as dangerous as Montenegrins, Theodore would have had us both buried weeks ago. Wolfe closed his eyes, savouring the beer before answering. The intrigues of émigrés, Archie, are detritus. Their feuds are old, their passions borrowed. That Americans allowed themselves to be entangled is the true vulgarity. Denton deserved his ruin. As for the rest, pfui. I leaned back, grinning. So all that sweat, midnight calls, dead brokers, and Balkan schnapps unworthy of your notice. He set the glass down with precision. Unworthy of prolonged thought. A weed in the garden is excised and forgotten. I do not brood upon the weed. At 11:52 the bell clanged like Judgment Day. I went to the door, and sure enough it was Kramer, trenchcoat dripping, cigar blazing even though the rain tried to drown it. He barged in, Stebbins hulking behind. "Wolfe," he barked. "You pulled it again. Denton's in a cell and the DA's chewing cigars in delight. But don't think for 1 second you made my job easier. You humiliated my men, hogged the spotlight, and—" "Pfui," Wolfe interrupted, leaning back. "Inspector, spare me. You have your murderer. Leave me the tranquility of digestion." Kramer puffed, face redder than his cigar tip. "One of these days, Wolfe, one of these days I'll haul you in for obstruction, and I'll enjoy it." "Idle threats," Wolfe murmured. "You would miss me." That did it. Kramer stormed out, smoke trailing like a tugboat leaving harbour. Stebbins glowered at me, muttered something about wise guys, and followed. The door slammed at 11:59. Fritz appeared at midnight on the dot, carrying a tray with cold chicken sandwiches, sliced pickles, and a second beer for Wolfe. For me, there was milk, tall and frosty. He placed it with the dignity of a maitre d' in a palace. Wolfe lifted his sandwich, sniffed, and bit with reverence. "At last," he declared, "a problem properly concluded." I raised my glass. "To orchids. Safer than Montenegrins and easier to water." He grunted, closed his eyes, and chewed. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing Manhattan clean. Inside, the balance was restored. Orchids upstairs, Fritz's sandwiches, Wolfe's beer, and me with my wisecracks. Case closed, midnight ritual intact.